I've been shooting on the S5iiX over about 5 months now, and now with a bunch of new cameras about to be getting released in the upcoming months, LUMIX releasing more cameras, I want to give you guys a couple of my thoughts about this camera after a little bit of a longer term review. Now I'm not going to go in depth about specs and different things like that, but I'm going to tell you a couple things that I like, a couple gripes I have right now with it, and if I would actually overall recommend this camera. Now let me give you a little bit of background about myself. So my name is Dangyou. I'm a filmmaker based in San Diego, California, run a video production company called 4x3 Films, and I've been shooting on LUMIX since 2016. On the original G7, I switched over to the G9, I got the GH6, and then I got sent and been using the S5iiX for the past 5 months. Now, there's a couple things that I absolutely love with this camera, and I'll start with a couple of those things first. One of the first and obvious things is autofocus. This autofocus is game changer, especially if you've been in the LUMIX world before on other cameras. It was just horrendous. So having phase detect autofocus is obviously a must going forward in any cameras that are coming out these days. The next big feature for me is open gate. I shoot almost primarily only in open gate unless I'm doing anything in 60 frames or 120 frames a second. Right now, what you're seeing is an open gate. If I'm shooting anything in 30 frames a second, it's an open gate. It just makes so much sense if you're planning to shoot or crop for vertical or horizontal, or in the future you want to crop something for vertical. Having that extra height and being able to shift your image up and down makes so much more sense to shoot in a 6K 420 10-bit open gate. So my third feature that I absolutely love is the dual native ISO. Now coming from the GH6, having the dynamic range boost mode, I've never really been a fan of that. But having a 640 base ISO and then a dual native ISO at 4000 makes so much more sense, because it just felt a little bit confusing on when I wanted to use the dynamic range boost, and I just want things to automatically just look cleaner when it gets to that dual native ISO like the S5iiX. Now, sticking into that comparison game, the fourth feature that I absolutely love is dual SD cards. One big gripe shooting on the GH6 is having a CF Express Type B slot and an SD card slot. I really like having 2 SD card slots, being able to have 2 SD cards and not having to run back, grab a different SD card and put it in if I only want to record to SD card slots. With that said, if I don't want to record an SD card slot, the next feature that I absolutely love is SSD recording. Now, I've been using the Condor Blue top handle that they sent me over to use for a competition with LUMIX. Now, this top handle is really, really nice. Being able to have an SSD top handle that has just the SSD built into it and not having to have something rigged on my camera on the side and get in the way, it makes it just more efficient being able to have everything go into a 1 or a 2 terabyte slot, which is honestly extremely tiny. Now, the last 2 things I absolutely love on the S5iiX, the first being Vlog. I absolutely love color grading Vlog over most other color profiles. Now, I colored Sony, I've colored Canon, I've colored Blackmagic, and Vlog is one of my favorites. Now, I am using Phantom Luts, which converts it to ARRI Alexa, which is so highly recommended. And if you're interested and you want to get a discount, you can click the code in the description below. But I highly recommend and love color grading Vlog. It's honestly so easy to get your image from being a flat color profile to looking something like this. Now, the last thing that I love about the S5iiX after 5 months of owning it is just full frame. Now, it was a little bit kind of confusing going from a micro four thirds system for the past whatever years to a full frame system, and how the bokeh kind of works different and aperture works a lot different. Shooting on f2.8 in micro four third terms is sort of like shooting on an f4 with the light of an f2.8. Shooting on full frame just makes it so much easier to get blurrier backgrounds. It's so much easier in low light conditions, and honestly, it's just been such a pleasure working on a full frame camera. Now, with all that said, there is still a couple gripes I have with the S5iiX. First off, starting off with HDMI connection issues. Now, I think this will eventually get fixed in a firmware update down the road, but currently, as I'm recording this, it's still an issue where you can't have all your information be on your screen and your monitor at the exact same time. Again, I do think this will just be a firmware update in the future where they fix that, but currently, even on the GH6 and the S5iiX, and I assume even the G9 Mark II right now, there's still the HDMI issue where it's not showing the information on both screens. Now, my second issue with the HDMI is lag, I guess. Basically, whenever I'm switching formats from, for example, 6K open gate, 30 or 24 frames a second, and then I'm going to 4K, 48 or 60 frames a second, at random times, my screen will start lagging out and it will just be super delayed, require me to turn off the camera, turn off the monitor, kind of refresh and restart everything, and then the lag will go away. Again, this is probably just a couple bugs in the software itself and will get fixed over time with firmware. Now, my next little gripe with this camera is going to be kind of a silly one, but physically speaking on the camera, I'm missing the dual flippy screen the GH6 and the S1H have. Now, I know the S2H or S1H Mark II will have probably this flippy screen where it kind of can flip up and flip out at the same time, but that is something I am definitely missing out from shooting primarily on the GH6 and now primarily shooting on the S5iiX. I definitely miss the dual flippy screen. And my last kind of gripe, the thing I'm not so much of a fan of, is 4K 60 frames a second crop. Having a crop mode and having to kind of reposition myself throughout the day makes it a little bit harder if I want to consistently switch back and forth. I'm not really bummed out by the crop if I'm just shooting in 4K 60 frames a second, but I kind of don't like it when I need to go from 24, 30 to 48 and 60 frames a second. Switching back and forth between those different frame rates with the crop and without the crop is kind of a little bit annoying when I want everything to be filmed in 4K. My workflow would be way more faster being able to shoot in 60 and 30 frames a second if I didn't have to deal with the crop. Now, with all that said, in conclusion, do I recommend getting this camera in 2023? Yes, without a doubt. This has been my favorite camera shooting on the last few months with, and it's honestly almost everything I want in a camera. There's of course just a little bit of quirks here and there with the crop modes, but for a sub $2,000 camera, you can't get a lot better than this. The color profiles are amazing. The autofocus is amazing. Just in general, everything that's able to do. I didn't even mention that this camera shoots B-RAW or Apple ProRes RAW externally. It has so many great pro level features for a $2,000 camera. Now, if you're interested in seeing another video where I compare the S5iiX versus the GH6, you can check out that video right here. And then YouTube recommends you might like this video right here. Till next week, guys, peace.